open with a strong warning. Evergrande was not the crisis. Evergrande was the signal. For years, the world watched China's property giants collapse and treated it like a real estate story. One over-leveraged developer, one broken balance sheet, one corporate failure inside a massive economy. But that was the comforting version. The darker truth is that Evergrande may have exposed something much bigger. An entire economic model built on land sales, debt, construction, local government financing, and the belief that property prices could rise forever. The opening should make the viewer feel that the real danger was hidden in plain sight. Key line: Evergrande was not the earthquake. It was the first building to fall. Main emotional effect: curiosity and unease. Now step back and explain how the machine worked. For decades, China's growth model looked unstoppable. Cities expanded, highways appeared, towers rose from empty land. Local governments sold land to developers. Developers borrowed from banks and shadow lenders. Families bought apartments before they were finished. Banks financed the cycle. Construction created jobs. Rising home prices created wealth. It looked like a miracle. But underneath the miracle was a dependency. Growth required more building, more borrowing, more land sales, and more belief. This chapter should show that China's property sector was never just about apartments. It was connected to household wealth, local government revenue, bank balance sheets, employment, commodities, steel, cement, and consumer confidence. The IMF has warned that China's prolonged property adjustment and debt overhang are spilling into local government finances. While weak domestic demand remains a major challenge, key line: China did not just build homes. It built an economic engine around the belief that homes would never stop rising. Main emotional effect: scale. The viewer realizes this is not one company. Now move into the psychological turn. A property boom can survive debt. It can survive overbuilding. It can survive bad loans. But it cannot survive the loss of confidence. Chinese families often stored their wealth in property. Apartments were not just homes. They were savings accounts, retirement plans, status symbols, and family security. But when developers stopped finishing projects, when prices weakened, when buyers lost trust, the system changed. The danger was no longer just that developers owed too much money. The danger was that ordinary people stopped believing the promise. This is where the story should become personal. A family buys an unfinished apartment. The developer runs out of cash. The building remains empty concrete. The mortgage still exists. The dream becomes a liability. Key line: the real collapse begins when people stop asking, "How much will my apartment be worth?" and start asking, "Will it ever be finished?" Main emotional effect: emotional connection. Now reveal the deeper mechanism. Local government debt. Evergrande was visible. The developers were visible. The unfinished towers were visible. But the more dangerous debt sits beneath the surface. Inside local government financing vehicles, regional banks, infrastructure projects, and hidden obligations that supported the construction boom for years. Local governments depended heavily on land sales. When property slowed, that revenue weakened, but the debts remained. Roads still had to be financed. Projects still had to be completed. Banks still expected repayment. Workers still needed wages. This chapter should feel like opening a trapdoor under the real estate crisis. Use a competitor-style escalation. First, developers lost access to credit. Then, land sales weakened. Then, local governments lost revenue. Then, regional banks became exposed. Then, stimulus became harder. Then, the entire growth model started feeding on itself. Research and policy discussions increasingly point to local government debt and its links to local banks as a major systemic risk channel in China. Key line: Evergrande owed money to creditors, but the system owes money to itself. Main emotional effect: hidden danger. Now introduce the contrast that makes China's crisis confusing. From the outside, China can still look strong. Factories are still producing, exports are still moving, electric vehicles, batteries, solar panels, chips, and AI-related products still show power. In June 2026, China's factory activity returned to expansion, helped by high-tech exports and AI-related demand. But beneath that strength, the domestic economy is fragile. Consumers are cautious. Property wealth has been damaged. Factory gate prices have faced deflationary pressure. Employment remains weak in parts of the economy. Household confidence is not behaving like a boom economy. This is the central contradiction. China can dominate exports and still struggle at home. It can build the future and still be trapped by the past. It can lead in factories while households refuse to spend. It can produce more while consumers feel poorer. Key line: this is not a simple collapse. It is something more dangerous. A two-speed economy where the export machine keeps moving while the domestic engine sputters. Main emotional effect: complexity and tension. The final chapter should deliver the big twist. The crisis bigger than Evergrande is not one company. It is not even one sector. It is the possibility that China's old growth model no longer works. For decades, the formula was clear: build more, borrow more, sell more land, create more jobs, export more goods, and trust that tomorrow's growth would pay for today's debt. But what happens when property stops rising? What happens when households stop spending? What happens when local governments lose land revenue? What happens when banks are asked to support debts that cannot be repaid? What happens when the world no longer absorbs unlimited exports without political backlash? This is the final warning. Evergrande was the name people could understand. But the real story is bigger than a developer. It is about confidence, debt, demographics, property wealth, and the end of a growth machine that once seemed impossible to stop. And with a strong closing line: every economic miracle has a hidden cost. China's miracle was built in steel, concrete, debt, and belief. Now the concrete is standing empty, the debt is still there, and the belief is starting to crack. Main emotional effect: serious, global, memorable.